Standing in the foyer of the house she'd inherited from her grandmother, the house where she'd spent summers as a child, she listened as her son, Mark, laid out his expectations. His wife, Sarah, stood beside him, a picture of demure expectation that didn't quite mask the glint in her eyes. Mark wasn't asking, he was demanding. He told her the house was the perfect size for their growing family, that living closer to the city would be better for their careers, and that, frankly, it was time she did something useful with the property instead of letting it sit there, mostly empty. His words felt like a physical blow, not just for their callousness, but for the assumption that everything she had was theirs for the taking. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe family should protect, not exploit each other. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. She had always been generous to a fault. Ever since her husband, Thomas, passed away 5 years prior, leaving her comfortably off with their family home and this second, smaller property, she had made it her mission to support Mark and his sister, Emily, in any way she could. She'd paid for Emily's master's degree, helped Mark with down payments on 2 different cars, covered unexpected medical bills for Sarah, and frequently gifted them significant sums for birthdays and holidays. Her children were her world, and ensuring their happiness was her priority. She believed, truly believed, that family was the bedrock of life, a circle of love and support you could always rely on. But what she discovered next would force her to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation. Eleanor had built a good life for herself. She lived in the spacious, paid-off house she and Thomas had shared for 30 years. She had a healthy portfolio of investments Thomas had carefully managed, and the smaller property, the grandmother's house, was also mortgage-free. It wasn't a mansion, but it was solid, well-maintained, and held deep sentimental value. She had considered renting it out, or perhaps letting Emily use it someday, but it had mostly remained a quiet retreat, a place for reflection and storing family heirlooms. Mark, her only son, had married Sarah 5 years ago, just a few months after Thomas's death. Sarah was charming, intelligent, and seemed, at first, to fit seamlessly into their small family. They had 2 young children now, Eleanor's cherished grandchildren. It was the grandchildren, she knew, that made her most vulnerable. Mark had a good job and Sarah worked part-time, but they always seemed to be struggling. There was always a new expense, a minor crisis, a reason they needed a little help. Eleanor had provided that help willingly, seeing it as her role to ease the path for the next generation. But lately, the requests had grown larger, the sense of entitlement more pronounced. Mark would call, not to chat, but to present a problem that only money could fix. Sarah would send passive-aggressive texts hinting at their financial strain compared to Eleanor's comfortable life. The first hint of something deeper, something colder, came subtly. Sarah began asking overly detailed questions about the grandmother's house, the property taxes, the utility costs, whether it had been updated recently. She framed it as polite interest, but the questions felt probing. Then came the comments about how much money Eleanor must be spending on its upkeep, how much easier it would be if someone was living there. Eleanor initially dismissed it as typical financial stress manifesting as envy. But the conversation in the foyer, Mark's outright demand for the house, was impossible to ignore. He spoke as if the house was already his, discussing renovations they would make, rooms for the children, a home office for Sarah. Eleanor felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. She mumbled something about thinking about it, needing time, the sentimental value of the place. Mark looked impatient, Sarah slightly annoyed. They left soon after, their departure feeling less like a family visit and more like the closing of a business meeting where the terms hadn't been fully accepted. Later that week, Eleanor was looking for an old photo album in the study. She rarely used the room, which still held many of Thomas's things. While searching through a desk drawer, she found a crumpled piece of paper that wasn't hers. It was a printout of the property records for the grandmother's house, clearly accessed online. The date on the printout was recent. Folded inside it was another note, a handwritten list. It wasn't a list of charming renovation ideas. It was a calculation, estimated market value, estimated closing costs, potential rental income, until sale, equals net gain. Below that, in Mark's familiar scrawl, probate issues? Mom's will? And Sarah's neater hand had added, contest. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. They weren't just asking for the house to live in, they were calculating its value, potential rental income, and anticipating selling it. And they were thinking about her will, about probate, about potentially contesting it. The casual entitlement she had noticed had a chillingly mercenary edge. This wasn't about needing a home, it was about liquidating an asset she owned and claiming the proceeds. The paper slipped from her trembling fingers onto the floor. This was the betrayal. This was the moment the quiet unease became sharp, undeniable pain. Her son and his wife weren't just financially needy, they were actively planning how to acquire her assets, even considering legal challenges after her death. The thought of them scrutinizing her will, discussing contesting it while she was still alive and well, was a violation that went deeper than mere greed. Her initial reaction was a desperate need to rationalize. Maybe it was a misunderstanding? Maybe they were just exploring options? Maybe the list was harmless speculation? She tried calling Mark, but he was busy. Sarah texted back, saying they were swamped with the kids and work. The avoidance felt deliberate. The denial began to crumble, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. They were planning. They saw her properties, her savings, as their future inheritance, and they were impatient. The shock gave way to a quiet, simmering anger, an anger that felt foreign and heavy in her chest. She knew she couldn't confront them yet. She didn't have enough information, enough proof they couldn't talk their way out of. Her first defensive action was small, almost instinctive. She found the physical deed to the grandmother's house, which she kept with her other important documents in a fireproof box, and moved the box from the slightly too accessible study closet to a locked safe in her bedroom. It was a small act, but it felt like drawing a line in the sand, a quiet assertion of ownership and control. The list went back into the drawer, but she took a clear photo of it with her phone, a knot forming in her stomach as she did so. It was the first piece of evidence. The pressure intensified rapidly after that. Mark called again, his tone firmer. Mom, have you thought about the house? We really need to make a decision soon. The market is good. Sarah sent texts filled with lamentations about their cramped apartment and the children needing space, followed by pointed questions about that empty house. They started visiting more often, their eyes seeming to linger on her furniture, her art, anything of value. The visits felt less like family time and more like inventory checks. Eleanor, however, had stopped offering explanations or excuses. She became evasive, saying she was still considering options or talking to a financial advisor. This vagueness clearly frustrated them. Mark's voice grew sharp. Mom, we're your children. This is for your grandchildren. What's the holdup? Sarah perfected the art of the sigh, conveying deep disappointment and thinly veiled accusation. Eleanor felt a growing sense of isolation. She mentioned the house request vaguely to Emily, who lived in another state, but Emily, always conflict-averse, just said, "Oh, Mom, you know Mark. He gets ahead of himself." Don't worry about it. Eleanor knew, with sinking certainty, that Emily wouldn't be an ally. Eleanor realized she needed professional advice. She couldn't navigate this alone. She made an appointment with the lawyer who had handled Thomas's estate, Mr. Harrison. He was kind, meticulous, and discreet. She brought the photo of the list, explained the demand for the house, and detailed the escalating pressure. Mr. Harrison listened patiently, his expression growing more serious. He confirmed her fears. This isn't a healthy family dynamic, Eleanor. Demanding property while you're alive and well, and looking into contesting your will. That suggests a significant sense of entitlement and a lack of respect for your autonomy. He advised her on gathering more evidence. Document everything, Eleanor. Every call, every text, every visit. Note the date, time, and what was said. If they make threats, financial or otherwise, write it down immediately. Save all texts and emails. He explained her legal standing. She owned the property outright. Her will was her private business. No one had a right to her assets while she was alive, nor could they force her hand regarding her property or her will simply because they were her children. He discussed options for securing her assets, protecting her main home, and legally disposing of the second property should she choose to. He mentioned setting up a trust or changing beneficiaries, but emphasized that selling the house was entirely her prerogative. Armed with Mr. Harrison's advice, Eleanor began her quiet, methodical counter-strategy. She started a detailed journal, logging every interaction, every manipulative comment, every implied threat. She saved every text from Mark and Sarah, scrolling back through months of messages she had previously dismissed as normal family banter, now seeing the subtle and not so subtle hints about money and inheritance. She changed passwords on her online banking and investment accounts. She added Mark's number to a Do Not Disturb list at night and screened his calls, letting most go to voicemail. The manipulators sensed the shift. Her evasiveness, her reduced availability, the distinct lack of new cash infusions, it rattled them. The pressure intensified. Mark showed up at her door unannounced, bringing the grandchildren as emotional leverage. "Mom, the kids are asking why we don't have a backyard. This apartment is tiny. Don't you want your grandkids to have space to run around?" Sarah, during a strange phone call, accused Eleanor of being selfish and not thinking about the future of the family. One evening, Mark called, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "Mom, I know you've been talking to a lawyer. Mr. Harrison." "Why? Are you trying to cut us out?" Eleanor froze. She hadn't told them about Mr. Harrison. How did they know? "I needed some advice on updating my will," she said calmly, a lie that felt necessary. "It's just good planning. Mark didn't buy it." "Is this about the house?" "We need that house, Mom. We deserve it. Dad would have wanted us to have it." The mention of Thomas, twisting his memory to suit their greed, was a new low. "Don't speak for your father, Mark," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. "You don't know what he would have wanted." This was the second antagonist cameo, the direct confrontation where the mask of need slipped, revealing the raw entitlement and willingness to use emotional manipulation, even invoking her deceased husband. This conversation solidified Eleanor's resolve. They weren't asking, they were demanding. They felt entitled not just to her help, but to her assets, seeing them as rightfully theirs. They were monitoring her actions, perhaps even trying to access her information. This was no longer a matter of family dynamics, it was a financial threat. She would not yield. She would protect herself and what she and Thomas had built. Eleanor worked closely with Mr. Harrison. They reviewed her will, her power of attorney, and her financial accounts. Mr. Harrison suggested placing her primary residence into a trust to protect it. As for the grandmother's house, her options were clear: sell it, keep it, or rent it. Giving it away under duress was not on the list of sensible choices. They discussed the evidence she had gathered, the list, the texts, the journal entries. It painted a clear picture of harassment and attempted financial coercion. The smoking gun, the definitive proof she needed, came unexpectedly. Eleanor decided to check the land registry records herself, just to understand the process Mark and Sarah had been researching. As she navigated the online portal, she saw that someone had recently made an inquiry about the property's deed and had also downloaded a copy of the survey. The dates matched the period after Mark's initial demand. Cross-referencing the IP address information available showed it traced back to a computer used by Sarah at her part-time job. It wasn't illegal for them to look up public records, But combined with the list about selling the house and contesting the will, it showed a clear, systematic effort to gather information without her knowledge or consent, all with a view to taking possession and cashing out. It confirmed the depth of their planning and their intent to treat the house as a purely financial asset. It was the final piece of the puzzle. She sent the screenshot of the access log and IP address to Mr. Harrison. This wasn't just speculation, it was active investigation into her property with a view to acquiring it through dubious means or by forcing her hand. With the evidence consolidated and the legal strategy in place, Eleanor felt a quiet sense of power replace her fear. She instructed Mr. Harrison to proceed with listing the grandmother's house for sale immediately. She also updated her will drastically. Instead of leaving equal shares of her residuary estate to Mark and Emily, she established a trust for Emily and her children, specifying conditions that protected the funds. For Mark, she left a nominal sum, legally required to prevent him from claiming she forgot him, but small enough to send an unmistakable message. The bulk of her estate, including the proceeds from the sale of the second house, would go into protected accounts and trusts managed by independent trustees, eventually passing to Emily's children and a few carefully chosen charities, ensuring Mark and Sarah would have no access or control. She also drafted a letter, not to be sent now, but to be included with her legal documents, explaining her reasons for the changes. Eleanor had decided to sell the house privately through a trusted agent, rather than publicly listing it initially, to maintain some control over the process and timing. The house was desirable, and offers came quickly. She accepted one, and the sale proceeded efficiently. The moment of truth arrived when the sale was nearing completion. Mr. Harrison sent a formal letter to Mark and Sarah, detailing the sale of the grandmother's house, confirming Eleanor's decision to update her will, and stating clearly that any further attempts to harass or pressure Eleanor regarding her finances or property would be met with legal action. Simultaneously, a copy of the updated will was filed, making the changes official. Mark called Eleanor first, his voice a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Mom, what is this? You sold the house? Why? How could you do this?" Sarah got on the line, her usual calm facade shattered. "You promised us that house. You can't just change your will. This is unfair. We're your family." They accused her of being cruel, vindictive, losing her mind. They brought up the grandchildren, weeping about how she was depriving them of a future. They threatened to contest everything, to tell everyone what a terrible mother she was. This was the climax, their shock and panic in the face of her quiet action. Eleanor listened, calm and controlled. Their desperation was palpable. She didn't raise her voice. "I sold the house because it was my property to sell," she stated simply. "And I changed my will to protect my assets and ensure they go where I see fit. Your behavior made it clear that my generosity was seen as an entitlement and my property as something to be exploited. I have documented everything. Any further contact demanding money or property, or any attempt to interfere with my legal decisions, will be handled by my lawyer." "This conversation is over," she hung up, her hands steady. Word spread quickly through the extended family. Mark and Sarah had already built a narrative about Eleanor being difficult and withholding. When the truth emerged that they had demanded her house, researched contesting her will, and faced consequences, opinions were divided. Some relatives sided with Mark and Sarah, muttering about greedy mothers and entitled children. Others, seeing the evidence Mr. Harrison discreetly allowed to surface, the sale itself was public record, the will changes discoverable, understood Eleanor's position. The social pressure backfired. Instead of isolating Eleanor, it exposed Mark and Sarah's true motives to those willing to see. Mark and Sarah made a few more desperate attempts, calls full of false remorse, texts filled with guilt trips. But Eleanor did not respond. Mr. Harrison sent another letter, a cease and desist. The stream of communication eventually stopped. The silence was jarring at first, but it was also peaceful. The house closed, the funds securely transferred to accounts Mr. Harrison had helped establish. Eleanor sat in her quiet, familiar living room. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. She had her health, her finances were secure, and her primary home was protected. Mark and Sarah were gone from her life, consequences of their own actions. Her relationship with Emily was strained, but Emily eventually came to understand, after seeing some of the documentation, that Eleanor hadn't acted without provocation. Eleanor had learned a painful lesson about the cost of unchecked generosity and the nature of family betrayal. She had faced the difficult truth about her son and his wife, and she had chosen to protect herself and her legacy. Her boundaries were clear now, etched in legal documents and resolute silence. There would be no reconciliation built on false pretenses. The peace she felt was hard-won, not the absence of conflict, but the quiet strength of having stood up for herself and prevailed. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself.